This episode is sponsored by Realtor.com, who wants you to take advantage of your free profile on Realtor.com. By claiming and completing your free profile, adding a photo, and all of the information that puts you head and shoulders above the competition, you're on your way to receiving free leads, helping search engines find you, and staying top of mind with past clients. To learn more about claiming your free profile, go to Realtor.com/profile.
Welcome to the Real View podcast, where Ohio Realtors connect you to innovators and influencers, keeping you with the real view of real estate. Whether you're a broker, agent, first-time homebuyer, industry leader, or just happen to stumble upon our podcast today, you can expect to hear tips, tools, tricks, interesting information, and so much more from the experts in Ohio's real estate game. Welcome back to the Real View podcast. I am your host, Allison Wiley. Joining me today, I'd like to welcome our very special guests. We have the pleasure of two state senators joining us today, Senator Hearcel Craig and Senator Michele Reynolds. Senators, welcome onto the show. We are so happy to have you.
Honored to be with you.
Good to be with you.
And I would also like to welcome our chief lobbyist, Andrew Huffman's joining us as well. This is his world, so we could not do a podcast around policies and housing in Ohio without him. So Andrew, welcome back onto the show. So we are here to talk today about the Senate Select Committee on Housing, and two senators joining us here today really led this initiative and did such a wonderful job with this committee and the work that went into it, their findings, their research, the time that they've given to housing in Ohio and what we can do to better it. Is really remarkable. So we're really going to dive into this today, get a good sense and feel of what the committee's been up to, what it was like working on this committee, some of the findings, and what we can expect into the future. But before we get started into this conversation, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about House Bill 466, which we are recording this the day after it was passed through. So Andrew, I'm going to turn it over to you if you'd like to tell us a little bit more about House Bill 466, what it means to the real estate industry, and a little bit more about what we were able to accomplish.
Allison, thank you. And we would not be able to say we passed that legislation without the two senators on the line with us today. But House Bill 466, what it does, it was introduced in light of the NAR settlement. And what it creates a statewide standard for the use of representation agreements in the real estate industry. And why that is so important, we need to make sure that consumers are aware of what their agents are getting paid and how they're getting paid. And that's what this bill is all about. It's about increasing transparency in the home buying process. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle realize that, and they also realize the need to get this done before the settlement changes take effect in August. So we were able to, I'll say, expedite that process. And again, even though the bill was introduced in the House of Representatives, it had to find its way to the Senate. And without Senator Craig and Senator Reynolds, this bill does not get passed because it was in Senator Reynolds' committee that she chairs, and she was able to arrange testimony on the bill and get it through. And in fact, many of the provisions in House Bill 466 were included in this housing report and a separate piece of legislation that both Senator Craig and Senator Reynolds introduced. So thank you both for spearheading this effort. And the industry is in a much better space because of it.
Yeah, it's really great. And I think both of your support and dedication to this, it's really amazing to see this be state law. And regardless of what's happening with the NAR settlement, now it will be the law for any practicing real estate agent here in Ohio. And that's really great to see. And as Andrew mentioned, it's just going to bring a lot of clarity and transparency as we work through the crazy intense process of homeownership and all that entails. So thank you guys again for your support. And Andrew, thanks so much for all your hard work on this. Really excited to see such swift action on it. So I want to start at the beginning. We know that housing in Ohio comes up a lot. We know the challenges and some of the issues that go on around availability, a shortage, and inventory. It's something that is top of mind, I know, for you all over at the State House as well as for here at Ohio Realtors. I would like to know a little bit of the background story and the history of why you all decided to create this specific committee regarding housing here in Ohio.
Senator Reynolds, I certainly, and I'm sure she's going to, as the chairwoman of the committee, and I'd really like for her to have the opportunity to speak on that issue more specifically. But I just need to say from the outset how much I appreciate her visionary leadership and to move this. It's one thing to talk about it. There is clearly a recognition that there is a housing crisis. And I think her leadership in this effort to assemble the House Select Committee was important. So I'll stop there and certainly speak more clearly as we move along.
Thank you, Senator Craig, and thank you both for having us on the show. We're truly partners in this effort. And very early on, I'm new to the General Assembly, I'm new to the Senate, and very early on, I remember expressing to Senator Craig that I want to do something in housing. My background, I've been a real estate agent since 2004, so 20 years. So I've seen the market fluctuate. I know the state of affairs here in Ohio, particularly as it relates to real estate, but I'm also a housing provider. And in my nonprofit work as a CEO and founder of an organization that provides housing to formerly incarcerated men and women and youth, I know the barriers that they experience. And so from both sides of the coin, I really understand housing at a very granular level and macro level. And I came to the state house to solve problems. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was really tackle housing. It's a huge issue. I was surprised that it wasn't being addressed. I told Senator Craig very early on that I wanted to do something in housing, and he immediately said, whatever you do, I'm with you. And I appreciated that support. I took that information or passion to our Senate president, laid out a case for why we needed to do something to address housing. And it was obviously a compelling argument because he formed the Senate Select Committee on Housing and commissioned me to be the chair. And so when I was assembling the team, I definitely said I'd like Senator Craig to be our ranking member on the committee, and we've been partners ever since.
No, I love that. And thank you again for your attention to this matter. It's really great to see the response too. You had the idea, went with it, brought it forth, and seeing that support was really, really special. And it's good to know that you all are taking such an important amount of time and detail into this issue. So I want to hear a little bit more about the committee, its work. I know you spent so many hours talking to people around Ohio, homeowners, hopeful homeowners. Tell us a little bit about what you learned, what that discovery process was like as you worked through this committee, and what you learned from the people here in Ohio.
I think it was important to go around the state and hear directly from people. Obviously, there are some differences, very economic, social, geographic, as we traveled the landscape, geographic landscapes across Ohio. There were some unique challenges. But what we found, there were some common issues too, and the common things, affordability, access to quality housing, and the need for updated infrastructure, that seemed to be the central concerns for residents all over Ohio. And hearing, and she'll talk about, we had hours of testimony, met with a very diverse group of residents and corporate leaders all over Ohio. It was important for us to do that, to get a real perspective and not be operating in a silo or a vacuum.
Yes, I'd like to echo what our ranking member said, is that, it was very important for us to hear firsthand from constituents. I always say that those that are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And so if we're going to tackle or address anything, we have to make sure that we get it directly from people who are experiencing it. And so we took 6 months and traveled the state, broke the state up into 5 regions, and had the committee on the road. And from that, there were common themes that we heard throughout. Like the ranking member said, we heard that, housing's just not affordable. I mean, there's an inflation problem, as we know, and it's getting worse. It's getting a lot worse in trying to find housing, but there's an accessibility problem as well. So even though there may be housing, it's not necessarily accessible or affordable. And then we have the challenge of, Ohio is growing by leaps and bounds, and we're expecting over 1 million people coming to the region very soon and in short order, because we've been doing a good job at showcasing Ohio as economic opportunity lives here. But the challenge is that, homes are where jobs go to at night. And we don't have enough homes. We don't have enough spaces for the people that we already have, let alone for those that are coming. And so we have to address this. And I think the problem is that with the affordable housing label on it, it didn't get the teeth or the attention that it needed, because as long as you put affordable on the problem, it made it seem like it was those people, poor people. But when we start looking at it from a workforce lens, then we kind of right-sized it, right? And then we started saying, uh-oh, now the business community cares about this. Now, more people than just the affordable housing advocates care about this. It's all of our problem. Our local communities, our cities, our counties, we all care about it, and we're feeling it. And so we went around and we heard all of those things. But, there were a lot of unique things, but there were some things that were different. In the urban communities, we don't have enough housing. And in the rural communities, we're losing population because housing's too expensive and infrastructure is just not there. We're not attracting development. And the locals can't afford the local match for the bond gap financing that is available through economic tools like the low income housing tax credit. So a lot of various things. We heard property taxes are an issue everywhere. And our ranking member sits on that special committee to address property taxes, because that needs special attention in and of itself. But we are taking a deep dive into these issues. But the central number one question was, what role should the state of Ohio be playing in this space to solve this problem and come up with a solution? We have to stay in our lane, because this is not something that one entity can do to solve it. It's going to take all of us working together, public-private partnerships, no one-size-fits-all approach. But we as a state need to know what our role is, and we need to play that effectively as a good partner.
Yeah, definitely.
Allison, if I could chime in, I've been at the State House for the last 15 years, and I've seen a lot of committees come and go, and few committees have put in more work than this committee in the 6 months that they met. I mean, we were given the opportunity, Ohio Realtors were given the opportunity to testify on 2 separate occasions. We had members testify at these regional meetings. And then, these senators, they sit through a 6-hour long committee hearing, and then they would go and tour different facilities, different construction areas. And I know down in Cincinnati, I think the hearing lasted about 7 hours, and we arranged a tour of a development in that area. And both Senator Craig and Senator Reynolds, they were willing to spend all that time learning from experts, and it really was a good process. I know you put some miles on the car, and I'm sure some gray hairs formed too. But you really put in a lot of work, and we can't say thank you enough.
Yeah, thank you guys. I echo what Andrew just said. Thank you for your time and effort into such an important topic.
This episode of The Real View is brought to you by the Ohio Association of Community Colleges. Ohio's network of community colleges provides accessible training that accommodates the busy lifestyles of aspiring real estate professionals at half the price of a traditional university. With convenient locations in every part of the state, as well as online options, Ohio's community colleges are your smart choice for pre-licensing education. For more details or to start the journey to a real estate career, visit the education page at ohiorealtors.org and then click on the pre-license course locations.
And it seems like this is really a bipartisan effort, and Senator Reynolds, as you were saying, it's really great that Ohio is being viewed in this light, and we are seeing an influx of people moving here, but we have to have a place for them to live. What do you guys think about housing and this issue of housing? Why is it so important to the state, and why have you been able to see that bipartisan support?
Listen, and I appreciate you raising that question. Housing is not Republican or Democrat. The truth is that it affects all of our families and our children. And I think the chairwoman spoke clearly about that and articulate about that, and that we need to make certain that housing, there's certainly the need for affordable housing, but also housing that is affordable. The city of Columbus, as you know, and this region is expected to grow by 1 million people already. It is at the seams, trying to make sure that all of our families have safe and affordable housing. We need to continue to build partnerships, corporate partnerships. We need to be reaching across the aisle in every way to make sure that our families and children, as we have this investment that is coming with Intel, with Google, all of the corporate investment, we need to make sure that we have places where folk can stay and build homes here. And I think the chairwoman has rightly stated, homes it is central, it is inextricably linked to the success, the growing success of our cities and our state. And so I think it is foundational and fundamental with regarding our homes, and that we're doing so in a way, in a bipartisan way that is important.
So I would also echo that. We're very proud of the bipartisan effort working together, because this is truly a humanitarian issue. It's not a partisan issue whatsoever. It affects all of us the same. So from a fundamental standpoint, human level, it's the right thing to do. But even beyond that, Ohio can't live up to its fullest potential that we put out there as an economic driver and to bring all of these great jobs if we're not taking care of the basic need of housing. And so if we really want to be the Ohio that is the heart of it all, the Ohio that we say that we are, the Ohio that we believe that we are, then we have to address that, or otherwise it would be a dereliction of duty. And so we need to do that.
Yep, absolutely. So we just heard a little bit about the committee's work, what all went into it, the amount of time and effort you all spent in really listening to and hearing from the people. It's really, really remarkable. So after you completed this work and went through your hours of hearings, there was a report that was formed. Can you tell us a little bit about this report, what it contained? I know it was quite extensive. I know we spent a lot of time here at Ohio Realtors reviewing and diving into the great findings that were made. Tell us a little bit about this report and the recommendations that the committee made.
I'm happy to start on that. So the report breaks down into the 5 various regions. And what we did first and foremost was chronicled everything that we heard through committee. So we wanted to share broadly, good, bad, or indifferent, what the people were saying. So we shared what we heard. We shared their proposed solutions in every community. And then we also then asked members on the committee, those that are standing members and ad hoc, our senators, to give perspective as well based on what they've heard and what they're bringing to the table. So that was something that was pretty unique, almost like a judicial opinion, if you will. We wanted those members to be able to have their own voice as we collectively talk about this issue. And then we came up collectively with our own set of recommendations, which is found on our 94-page report. And it is 23 recommendations. And that's where we kind of drew some consensus based on what we've heard, based on kind of our priorities of what the state's role should be, and kind of what our framework is, if you will, for future legislation. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody how the state is coming, because we're coming directly with what we said in the report. And legislation came out right after. And not everything. I mean, we rolled some things out, which we're doing in a methodical way. We realize that this is going to be some short-term and some long-term solutions. It's not going to be addressed overnight. But in the report, we find 23 recommendations, and there's various things in there that are addressed, from alternative housing, opportunities to innovate in housing, creating an Ohio housing dashboard that will allow us to have informed metrics, if you will, on what we're doing to make sure that it's working so that we can be more data-driven, putting together an Ohio Housing Toolkit that will be a resource to help our local cities and counties and townships as they try to develop, like updating their zoning code or their strategic plans and things like that, providing the technical assistance, best practices, expert guidance that they need. Also, looking at new ways to increase home ownership. This is not just about rentership. Looking at consumer protection, like we just did with the House Bill 466, consumer protection. There is something in there about eviction record sealing, not necessarily the eviction per se, a bona fide eviction, but when people get a filing of eviction, whether it goes through or not, it just sits on their record and there's no cleanup. And so looking at that, because we already know there's barriers to the housing market, we don't need additional barriers. So cleaning those things up. Transaction transparency, not a very popular thing for big out of town investors. However, it's becoming a growing problem that in the event we have a problem property, we can't find out who owns it to be able to reach them. The local governments can't reach them, the auditors, to just say, hey, we need someone to address this issue. Not that we're trying to uncover them to, come down hard on them, but we do need to make sure, just like with government, we have to be transparent. We're looking at a very simple way of maybe through the transfer of real estate process to be able to say what human being is attached to this property transfer so that we can reach out to them, kind of like an emergency contact, if you will. Looking at housing legislation, which we've already rolled out. Senator Craig and I have rolled out a series of bills to address some legislation that needs to be changed in Ohio to make it more conducive for affordable housing. We have a placeholder bill for zoning. As soon as we put that out there, people just started going crazy. We didn't put anything in the bill, but they just started going crazy. Oh, you're going to touch our zoning. But we have to remember that, zoning was created for a purpose. It wasn't necessarily to keep people out or exclude people. It was for protective factors back in history. And so we just have to look at not necessarily a rezone. And I appreciate there are a lot of cities that are doing that, but looking at modernizing the way we look at zoning so that we can be a lot more inclusive, a lot more flexible, if you will, so that we can, absorb kind of where we are now. There's also looking at the workforce element of housing, qualified residential construction personnel, updating who can do inspections and what type of certifications and licensure you need. We still need quality, but we don't need barriers that keep us from having folks in those trades. Updating our codes for renters is something that we pulled out. An Ohio Housing Accelerator, looking at doing some CDBG dollars, which is, community development grants, putting something out there to help our local planning departments and our cities and our counties be able to accelerate housing and give them the economic incentives that they need to get that done. One of my favorites is the Ohio YIMBY campaign, which is Yes in My Backyard. We know that NIMBY has been crippling as it relates to housing for very many years, especially in local communities. People were like, yeah, that's nice, but we don't want that here. We go ahead and do that in Columbus. So Ohio can play a role by putting together a messaging campaign statewide that Ohio is in the business of putting housing first and that we want a pro-housing landscape and we want to do things that are going to paint Ohio as a place that we want people to live, work, and raise a family. So that's just a couple of various things. We're looking at getting some legislative representation on the Ohio Housing Trust Fund and OFA, Ohio Housing Finance Agency, for some oversight so that we can lend them the support, but also have the accountability and we can change things if we need to. We're looking at changing the name of the Ohio Department of Development to the Ohio Department of Housing and Development by putting housing first. First of all, they're already doing a lot as it relates to housing, but they're not necessarily getting, the accolades, if you will, for all of the pro-housing things that they're already doing. So kind of putting that first, since we're already naming other departments, right? Renaming other departments, we might as well go a little further. And then we have a third-party reviewer service that pretty much provides support to our local building departments that if someone puts in a building permit application and it's just kind of sitting on the shelf and we're not getting things moving, that it deputizes a third-party reviewer to be able to process those applications in a more expedited and efficient manner. So we're putting our money where our mouth is. This was not just a pretty report. It's a nice legislative report, but we're already starting to put the ball in motion and We're getting hearings on these things. We passed a couple of things out yesterday. Ohio Realtors is one of the first with your bill, so we're very happy about that. Senator Craig and I had a hearing on property tax, a second hearing, and we had proponents on property tax bill that we introduced. And so we're excited about seeing how that goes, but we're doing a lot with this report.
Yeah, it sounds like you're just getting started, and the report is available, right? I think I want to say Ohio Realtors posted it on our website, I think, when you first had sent the press release out. But it is available if any realtors out there listening or any consumers want to dive into it, want to see all of the 23 recommendations. That is available. Is it on your website, Senator Reynolds, so they can access the report?
Yes, at the Ohio Senate, you can access that on the committee page for Senate Select Committee on Housing. There is an accessible PDF link to download that report, or you can reach out to my office and we have hard copies, and we're more than happy to supply a hard copy for anyone who wants one.
Yeah, I just think this is a great tool, for our realtors, our members, and consumers, to hear about what's directly being done to address the housing issue. And thank you guys, because it sounds like it's a lot. It sounds like you're just getting started. You have a really great map to lead you into the future with this. And as you mentioned, we're already seeing progress on that. So it's really great to see. And I want to thank you guys both again for all of your time and effort in housing, for joining us here today, for your support of 466. We are so grateful to be working with you and being together addressing these issues. So I want to thank you guys both again for everything. And Andrew, thank you as well for all of your hard work too.
Awesome.
And to all of our listeners, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll be back with you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Real View. That wraps up today's episode. You can keep up with the latest on the podcast at ohiorealtors.org/therealview and on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Have questions, comments, or suggestions? We want to hear from you. Email us at podcast@ohiorealtors.org. We'll see you next time.